All right. Hey, y'all. It's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis and, of course, William Green, as you can see here. And today we're going to talk about a couple of topics, actually, including those Cattleya rexes in the background, each with a different story that we're going to kind of go over today. And what was the other topic, William?
A plant pathology report was one thing. And the other thing was, how do I get more flowers on my orchids?
That's right. We're talking about just general good care culture leading to increased blooms.
Have you ever heard that if you use more of this nutrient, this bloom booster, your plant will produce more flowers?
You know, my video that published today talks about that because I posted something called Orchid, Unpopular Orchid Opinions. And the very first thing I talk about is
that's great.
that bloom boosters are snake oil. And so, you know, I think that's we could talk more about that right now, really. And maybe we should just springboard from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say what I said in that other video is that bloom boosters are not needed in anyone's collection. And those came about, maybe 100 years ago or so when we collectively, orchid growers who lived 100 years ago, I'm not a vampire, would take way too much nitrogen and pour it on their orchids because that's what people did in the garden and on the farm. And so that nitrogen produced lots of green growth, but that nitrogen is inhibitory to orchids. So the thought was that if you lower the nitrogen and increase the phosphorus was the trigger for blooms, but it wasn't the phosphorus. It was the reduction of the nitrogen that was actually causing or allowing the plants to bloom instead of phosphorus causing the plants to bloom.
Right.
So now that we know how little in terms of nutrients are really needed for these epiphytic orchids that don't get a whole lot of nutrients up in the trees or even the ones on the ground.
And I remember when you were chatting with Fred Clark, how he said that he doesn't really, if I remember correctly, he said he doesn't really change his fertilizer concentration. He just changes his frequency of watering. And that decreased frequency equates to a decrease in fertilizer. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I think he did talk about increasing the concentration a little bit during the growing season and then kind of backing off. But for the most part, that's right. He doesn't mess with bloom boosters, and he is one of the most prolific orchid growers of our generation, or maybe of all time.
Highly awarded.
He's got his own friggin' genus named after him. I mean, how cool is that? So now that we can collectively, orchid growers in general, we know that a low amount of nitrogen and a low amount of everything,
right,
given kind of weekly, is the way to go. And
right,
that there's bloom boosters aren't going to boost your blooms, and B, the best way to get really good blooms is good culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that pretty much echoes what I've been seeing in terms of when I look at really successful growers. Ed's Orchids on YouTube, he has an unbelievable slipper orchid collection. He says that Ray Barkalow, who many orchid growers know as the originator of K-Lite and Kelp Max and First Rays, they say the same thing.
And he invented semi-hydroponics too.
Invented semi-hydro, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but yeah, the idea is that if your plants have optimum nutrition, that doesn't mean more is better, but if they have everything that they need, that means light, moisture, nutrition, all that good stuff, they will naturally bloom their best. So it's not an idea of you're going to make the plant bloom more. You're going to let the plant bloom more because it wants to. It just can't if you don't give it the right culture.
That's right. And that's exactly right. It's sort of this more of a holistic approach to growing your plants successfully so that you have those big fat bulbs, you have those really perfectly apple green leaves, you have this huge flush of roots that grows and sort of that encapsulates the pot. Those are the things that are going to lead to what's over your shoulder there is a bunch of absolutely gorgeous blooms.
Oh, I thank you. Actually, on this note, I did an experiment this year because, as you know, with my Cattleya collection, I really love to play with the idea of a dry season in the winter. And so from November through February, I really reduce the amount of fertilizer down to almost nothing. I water less often. I keep temperatures pretty steady. But the experiment this year was if I maintain regular moisture, but if I take away those nutrients during the dry season, will that somehow actually result in more flowers? Because like we were saying, the idea is a reduction in certain nutrients can actually stimulate blooming. So it's like, And I was also thinking about the Chadwick article on Varsovicii that says, don't water and feed until the new growth is 4 inches tall or something like that. And I was thinking, well, these guys started growing halfway through the dry season. And I was like, so do I just cancel dry season and start, pouring on the stuff or keep them in those dry season conditions as they grow, almost like your catasetums. And then when the rains finally come is right when they start blooming. So anyway, I did that this year. And I have to say, I have fewer flowers than I had last year.
Interesting.
So now that's not necessarily 100% causation because, it's possible that I didn't feed enough during last year's growing season to put enough nutrients in the bulb to bloom this blooming season. So, I mean, there's still a lot of variables there, but I can definitely say that the growth and the flowers are overall not as robust this year as they were last year.
And that's part of that overall cultural issue is experimenting, is kind of looking at the literature and saying, will this work for my culture and lead to blooms over here? And and then making those sort of conclusions that yes, this tweak to my culture worked, or no, that tweak to my culture that I thought was going to work, maybe it didn't work. And just like you said, talk about variables. Ideally, you're only manipulating one variable at a time.
That's what.
So
yeah.
And it's so hard when you're trying to get the lighting right, try to get the water right, the nutrition, and all these other things, pesticides, bugs, diseases, which of course we'll talk about in a moment. But
but it's
so
also
it can
fun.
be hard.
That's part of the fun. Like if you don't
that,
then there's plenty of orchids that you can grow that you don't have to worry about that. These guys will grow just fine. You don't have to do too many scientific experiments to get your big grocery store phalaenopsis to bloom. Sorry, I just had to throw that guy in there because it's huge.
Which that's a really nice bloom. I like that arching inflorescence too.
Yeah, but yeah, the especially some of the more delicate species and things like that. Like you gotta be a little bit of a scientist. But yeah, being really following through with strict, like what you said, like controlling this and not changing that. Another experiment I've been doing is I noticed that a lot of my Cattleyas had these yellow patches in the leaves, and I'm like, what's going on here? So I actually changed two things. One, I started dissolving a teaspoon of Epsom salts in a gallon of distilled water, shook that up, and then sprayed all the plants with that, about half gallon of it the first time, and then a few weeks later, another half gallon. But at the same time, I also dimmed the lights by about 15%. I had them at 100 and I dimmed them down to 15. So last week's video, people are saying, hey, I can tell your plants look greener. And I was like, oh, really? I couldn't even, but now that I look, it's like, yeah, maybe they are. But I don't know if it was light or magnesium or both.
Yeah. No, that exactly. That's sort of that's a really good case study of manipulating one, because now you're not sure what the increased greenness or is from.
Right.
So I mean, I guess the easy thing to do now is maybe take away that magnesium
Yeah.
and then see if they change somehow, and that'll kind of narrow down your conditional experiment, I guess.
And who knows? I mean, there's so many nutrients that play into growing and blooming that, again, it's almost like you just have to manipulate one at a time, but the amount of time you have to manipulate it is so long to see. You know, you're talking months, maybe even an entire year, an entire growth cycle to really see, oh yeah, that was a deficiency there. But yeah, so the bottom line
exactly.
is, if your plant's not looking great, pouring a bunch of fertilizer on it probably isn't going to make it better, but
Or
there's always
if there's a new product out there that you think it is advertised as the bloom boosting, plant growing, end all be all, it's probably snake oil.
I couldn't get my orchids to bloom at all until I tried
Yeah, exactly.
the Van Kampen-Lewis formula.
Yeah, and only $1,000 for this little tiny bottle.
Maybe you'll get some emails asking for that formula.
Maybe I should make it.
It's shampoo.
I'll just take I'll just put a VKL label on some fizzy water can and sell it.
Yeah. So this year I'm going to try to be better at doing like we were talking earlier, with where I don't change the fertilizer concentrations much. I don't know if I'll be able to keep my hands off it completely, but definitely not reducing it to the levels that I was last winter. Maybe this winter just watering a little less often, but still using fairly regular fertilizer, and see if all my plants don't rot, might have more flowers in the spring.
Yeah, and that would be an interesting experiment. And ideally, or maybe what you can do is have two plants. One gets one treatment and one gets the other, or even take a division of the same plant. Maybe massacre the roots in the same amount so they're both equally set back, and then see which one does better, or maybe neither.
It helps that they're siblings, so that could make the experiment a little bit more reliable in terms of results.
Yeah, and that they've been growing under the same conditions for close to 10 years.
Yeah, you're right. That's a long time. Now, speaking of division, maybe we can transition to this other topic. So this plant last year, actually it was just a few months ago, it had a bulb on it that just had like a black spot, and it was kind of black with brown along the edges. And I noticed that it was slowly getting bigger, and I was like, all right, well, something's up with this thing. So I took off the back half of the bulbs, the back half of the plant. There were 5 older bulbs on this plant. I actually submerged the whole plant in a solution of water it was a gallon of water with 2 teaspoons of Fusarium in it, to just like create some kind of sterile germ killing environment. And I actually cut the rhizome while it was submerged in that solution. And then I took some pictures when I brought the plant out, and the entire internet said, your plant's got Fusarium. And I was like, well, that's not what I wanted to hear.
I remember seeing that post on Instagram, and yeah, it was like that perfectly classic textbook, like pink purple ring around the outside of that rhizome.
Ugly. And so I sent that back half of the plant off to the plant pathology lab at the University of Colorado. So here's what they wrote back. They said the diagnostic test and method was visual observation, microscopy, and microbial culture. So they actually take a little piece of the plant, put it on an agar plate, and see what grows. It says the fungal pathogen Fusarium species was detected in the sample. Signs of the pathogen, such as mycelium, fruiting bodies, and spores, were observed after culturing the roots. The symptoms and lesions on the plant are consistent with Fusarium root rot. And then the rest of it just goes on to tell you a little bit about Fusarium. It says cultural practice to avoid Fusarium diseases include avoiding excessive nitrogen fertilization, crop rotation, not really an option for me. Resistant cultivars, which I've told myself now basically, well, I'm breeding Fusarium resistant plants. And avoid long periods of drought or excess water, and do not reuse potting soil.
So basically, don't stress your plant, and the Fusarium will have a harder time getting into the plant. Is basically what they're saying.
Penetrating the tissues, exactly.
Yeah. So that just goes back to all around general cultural practices.
Right.
Of course, there's things that you can do, and sterilizing your tools between plants, things like that. But hey, this happens to all of us. I think.
Yeah.
It's a pretty common ailment.
Yeah. So the question is now, what do I do next? Because obviously, if the part that I cut still had the purple ring, then that means that it's still in this rhizome, right? So now the question is, do I just take off the next bulb and see what that looks like, and then take off the next one and see what that looks like, and just keep chopping until I don't have anything left? I've given it a thiamine treatment, 2 thiamine treatments at this point, which it's a fungicide. You make a solution of it, you dunk the whole plant in it, you sit it for 15 minutes. It's supposed to soak into the tissues and kill the fungus, and then you do that. You repeat 2 weeks later. So yeah, it's one thing if this was an easily replaceable plant, but it's not easily replaceable. And so
you've done the dual treatments so far?
I've done 2 thiamine treatments so far, and I've treated other plants in the collection as well, because I can't imagine that this is the only one that has it. I can't imagine that living in a commercial greenhouse for 2 years and living in this tent together for getting close to 2 years now too. It's just like, I can't imagine. I mean, the one reason I have them all planted in rocks is to reduce that possibility of fungal, soil-borne or medium-borne illnesses, things that can kind of live in there. I was thinking, well, so I don't know when it contracted it. I don't know how long it's had it. It had a wonderful bloom last year with four blooms on one spike. And it's put out 2 new growths this year, but you can tell they are smaller. So yeah, I'm kind of at a. I
mean, now that you've done the treatment, to me, it would make sense to cut off that farthest back bulb and see if you get that telltale purple color, and maybe this is your sacrificial plant. Maybe you keep treating it until you keep chopping the bulbs off until it goes away, or the plant just dies, right?
Yeah.
So until you're at the newest bulb, and well, at that point, it just goes in the garbage.
Yeah, the question that I wish I knew the answer to is, can you actually kill Fusarium once it's gotten into the plant's tissues? Because most of the stuff you read about, it's like, once it's in there, it's in there,
Yeah, I am curious about the thiamine treatment and what the outcome is supposed to be. Is it supposed to be eradication, or is it just knocks it down enough to the plant just keeps growing, as normal and blooms as normal? And maybe since you already have the ear of the university, at least for this, maybe someone over there can answer.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, on the label instruction, it's just like it has a list of fungi that it treats and how to treat it in different ways for different ones, but it doesn't say doing this series of treatments will eradicate it doesn't say that. It's just this is for that thing. And so and I also don't know what dead Fusarium would look like. If it actually did somehow kill it out of the plant, I can't imagine that the purple ring would just disappear. So what would that look like too?
That's a good question. And maybe somebody watching this is like, hey, I know.
Right.
And they can add comments, because I'm curious to know too.
All of our mycologists, all of our PhDs in mycology, please weigh in on this one. So
exactly.
I can't imagine. One thing that's been interesting is that the purple ring is something that you can, be pretty sure about when you cut the plant. But there are actually external symptoms of Fusarium infection. For example, if you look online, there's actually a few scientific papers that they show different symptoms, and one of them is a pattern of spots along the pseudobulb, like
dark spots.
Yeah, like, and I hate for people to look at that and say, oh, that's a diagnostic factor for Fusarium, because a lot of plants can have little spots on them and stuff, but it can create necrotic spots along the bulb, along the backs of the leaves. And the paper specifically said a group of 4 similarly sized black dots on the back of a leaf can be an indication. So, I mean, it's handy to think that you don't have to chop your plant and have to know if it has an infection or not.
Yeah. And yeah, so yeah, maybe if somebody home was saying, hey, I just had a bunch of those spots show up on one of my Cattleyas, maybe if that Cattleya is big enough, you do kind of chop that and look for that that telltale purple ring, but maybe it's too small for that, and you just let it keep growing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, my philosophy, I've had people, for example, I would send them, I would maybe post a picture of a plant. I did this last year I had a Cattleya maxima with like these really nasty black spots that came all the way up the sheath. And when I cut it, there was not a purple ring, there were purple streaks going through the rhizome. And I took all that off, and then I had people saying, oh my gosh, I saw those black dots on my plant too. So I immediately cut it into like 3 pieces. And then I realized I didn't have, there was no infection or whatever. And I was like, so the lesson to
what
be
did
learned
you
here,
learn?
right? Yeah, I would like to think that I'm a very, very, very on the extreme side of wait and see. Some people would probably say I wait too long for some things, but just my experience has just been, if the plant seems to be growing okay and you don't have really aggressive outward signs of disease, my personal preference is to, just let the thing go and try to, as we said earlier, optimize those growing conditions.
And don't panic.
Don't panic. And the thing that I get told the most is you've got to separate it. I don't have, that's just not an option for me. I can't. Everything is in the same place. And
so are you going to go through your other plants and kind of snip some back bulbs and just,
I think if I do, it certainly won't be like an all in one day kind of a thing. I might look at plants that their oldest leaves look a little pitted, a little yellow, a little wrinkly, not going to do too much damage just taking off the last 2 or last 3 bulbs if the plant has 8 or 9 bulbs, and just looking, but again, sometimes you can ask yourself, is that a purple ring? Like, sometimes it looks like a little, very, very thin little ring of color, and you're like, So, I mean, I would send those. Another thing is the diagnostic laboratory, every sample you send them is $25. So that can add up as well.
So maybe you don't send in, if you get another glowing purple ring, you're like, crap, I know what that is. But maybe you send in the sort of maybe partial,
the ones that are really
purple. Yeah.
Yeah, like I sent them a bulbophyllum sample last year that had a very clear pinkish red ring when I divided it. I sent them a sample. They said, no, this plant's clean. It's fine. I was like, I mean, I guess there's a possibility that they committed an error as well, but I'm much more likely to trust their
different genera are going to show differently. Maybe I guess I don't know enough.
Right. So that, again, if the plant seems to be mostly okay, then
let it carry on.
I'm going to have a hard time throwing it away.
Yeah. Well, on that sad note, let's let's turn around and check out the blooming one that is ideally Fusarium free.
Yeah. So today is AOS judging at the Denver Judging Center. I'll be heading down there in the next couple of hours. And I wanted to ask your opinion, sir, because it is very, very, very similar in size, form to the one that was awarded last year, and it was an HCC. And for anyone who's not up on the AOS awards, the HCC is kind of like the bronze medal.
Stands for High Class Certificate. And
highly commended, Stephen.
That's right. Sorry, damn it.
But it does really have pretty decent form on it. Petals are nice and wide. Dorsals aren't super reflexed, kind of, but not really bad. So I'm gonna take it and just hear what they have to say.
No, and I think that's what you should do. You know, just looking at that, it does have. So the judges will be looking for a quote unquote flat flower, where the petals and sepals are held directly straight out to the side, and as we can see there, the petals are leaning forward, and then the sepals are kind of leaning back, and then the top of that sepal kind of curves like this.
Yeah, got a little
the dorsal sepal. Yeah, and so those are all things that the judges will think about, and then they'll think about it not necessarily in relation to all Cattleyas, but they'll think about it in relation to that species. You know, is that kind of a normal thing for that species? And if it is, then they'll kind of change their judginess as they're judging, right? And then, but you know, so kind of moving on from just that plant and going forward, there's a lot of Cattleya species where the wild versions look just like that in terms of form. But line breeding will make those flat, and it will sort of reduce or remove those flaws. And of course, I say flaws with wild features. Some quotes on that. And then so that will change the way that a plant is judged as time progresses. But the breeding, at least in this country, for that species hasn't gotten to that point. So they'll have to kind of sit and think about, you know, how are we going to point this? How are we going to score this? And I'm curious to see what they say.
My early prediction is going to be they're going to look at the pictures. There's only, I think, 5 or 6 Cattleya rexes ever awarded. And I think they're going to look at the pictures, especially the one from last year, because it's a sibling of this plant. And I think they're going to probably say it doesn't look enough different from the last year plant to judge it, but that's my overly pessimistic.
I think there's a good chance that they won't say that. They'll say this plant looks a lot like the one that we gave an HCC to last year, so maybe it's at the same level and we'll score it similarly.
That would be awesome.
And I suspect you have at least a couple of the judges who awarded the one last year on this team as well, and
oh yeah.
And maybe, you know, just talking to them, hey, this is a sibling. What do you think? You know?
I actually have last year's plant that was awarded. It has 2 spikes this year, one with 3 and one with 2. But as of today, only the one with 3 is open. The 2 buds are still just buds. So I mean, I guess I could take that one as well.
How open are they? Is it a nicer bloom this year than last year in terms of form?
I have a hard time saying. The good thing about it is that since it just opened like yesterday, really fully open, the dorsals are still like straight up and down.
Should take it.
So really,
see if maybe you can bump it up to an AM.
They said that, yeah, who knows? We'll see. Okay, well, looks like I'll be getting the orchid car seat out and maybe taking a couple of them. At least it might be nice for them to compare.
That's another really good point. Although if it is a nicer bloom this year, they're going to say, oh wait, we gave this nicer one an HCC. Maybe this one over here doesn't deserve an HCC.
Like, not so much.
Yeah.
There's a strategy involved.
Yeah, there's some strategy.
Oh my gosh. Well, then I don't know if I'll take it or not, honestly.
Do you remember what the score was for the HCC?
78.
So, I mean, you could reasonably get 2 more points based on floriferousness, and, you know, maybe another point for increased floriferousness, and maybe another point or 2 for the form. And that would bump you up to an AM on the same plant. So, you know, I guess it all depends on what you want. You know, do you want to have 2 awarded plants, or is it more important to elevate the HCC to an AM, or say screw it, I'm just going to take both, and whatever happens happens.
I think option 3 is probably the most reasonable thing, you know.
Yeah.
I gotta, yeah. It's ultimately, it's nice to hear what the judges have to say, you know.
And that's one of the things that I think prevents a lot of people from taking their plants, is they're like, oh, it's not worth it. You know, they're not going to award it, and you don't know until you show up and have it looked at. And then what should happen, and usually happens, I think, is the judges will give feedback. So they'll say, you know, A, we awarded your plant because of X, Y, and Z, or B, we didn't award your plant because of A, B, and C. And then you can think about that, like, oh, okay, so this plant, the deficiencies for receiving an award are these things. Maybe I can change my culture and fix this, or maybe it's a matter of just sprucing the plants up and making, you know, as the inflorescence comes out, maybe you're training it. There's a bunch of different things, and the judges are really the ones that can help you figure out, you know, whether or not you can sort of manipulate some things to make it an awardable flower.
Yeah, they're really they're very directed to the point. I've been told this plant's flowers aren't going to get any better, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, you just kind of have to leave your ego at the door. And
that's exactly right. And I've had folks message me on different platforms and saying, you know, the judges said this about my flowers. I'm kind of upset. And, you know,
that's their
it
job.
is what it is.
Yeah,
they're judgmental. They're judges, you know, like that's how this works. And all of those judges have had plants of their own rejected for scoring as well. So it's just part of the process.
Yeah. All right. Well, Stephen, we're just over half an hour, believe it or not.
Good God. We talk a lot.
It's a good thing, though. This is turning into like a podcast almost. We might have to.
Yeah.
Might have to figure out how to rip the audio and start a podcast.
That'd be a whole new thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, until next time, guys, thank you so much for listening. Please leave your comments below. Let us know what you thought. If you are an expert in mycology, please let us know what you think. Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Adios.
See ya.